Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering what is, I believe, the highest single target damage character in the entire game, barring some bugs or exploits, because this character will reach average damage in a single round while completely naked of the mid-300s, and theoretical maximum damage when properly geared and with appropriate buffs from themselves and allies in the multiple thousands of damage, using no bugs, exploits, or unintended mechanics, only things that are present in the game and intended to be used in the way that we're using them, to be able to burst down any character or enemy in the entire game in a single round of combat absolutely with 100% certainty. The character that I'm talking about, of course, is the Draconic Sorcerer, who can stack damage on fire damage to absurd levels, to the point where your fire damage spells are doing massive damage with every single cast, and the higher you level up and the more of them you can cast per turn and the more damage you can stack, which is of course what we're going to do, the more damage you do. This character also just gets full sorcerer casting normally. You get to be as a powerful functional sorcerer in addition to the massive burst damage that you can output, and so you get all the utility and party support that brings as well, with twin casting haste or other utility spells available. This is, I think, one of the most powerful possible honor mode characters as well, because the way that we get all this damage does not abuse any damage rider source, bugs, or anything like that, and so all of this entire build is totally functional on honor mode. So if you just want to watch the world burn, you've come to the right place. Before I begin, I do have a couple quick thank yous to give out, so I want to say thank you so much to Fusako for the $5 donation, Dalton Jenkins for the $2, and Fenwis, Jacques Lapere, and Synergy for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I really do appreciate it. It really means a lot. Alright, let's jump in and start talking about the Draconic Sorcerer. So obviously we're going to switch our subclass to Draconic Bloodline, and the Sorcerer here is going to focus on fire damage. The reason for this will become clear as we build the character, but basically fire damage, when you select a Draconic Sorcerer, at level 6 you get the ability to add your Charisma modifier to damage on every attack that you make. Using fire damage allows us to do this with Scorching Ray, which, if cast with a level 6 spell slot, fires 7 different attacks, applying our Charisma to damage 7 times with a single spell cast. Because we're a sorcerer, we can quicken that, and because we're a sorcerer, we can have haste, allowing us to do this multiple times in a single round of combat, stacking our charisma, which we can get up to a maximum of 24 with the items and story events that allow you to do that, to apply to our Scorching Rays dozens of times in a single turn, as well as any other stacking damage modifiers that we get. This build is so powerful because it allows you to stack damage on every single attack that you make. These all can critically hit as well, and so we're rolling hundreds of dice and adding hundreds of flat damage to burst down every enemy in the game. To begin with, let's start by picking a race. I'm using the Halfling Hireling here as the example character, because like all sorcerers, being a halfling is very good for this character. Getting to reroll natural ones is incredibly powerful because it allows you to maintain concentration on concentration spells. Because you're a sorcerer, you're very likely to cast haste on yourself, or twin cast haste on yourself and an ally, or just twin cast haste on 2 allies if you feel like you want to take a backseat in a fight and let your allies shine for a change. And being able to maintain concentration on haste is incredibly important. Sorcerers get Constitution save proficiency by default, and halflings allow you to reroll 1s, which means that most incoming concentration checks that you will make when you're a halfling, you will pass very easily, because we will need to roll a natural 1 or 2 in order to fail them, and we reroll the 1s, meaning that we only have a 1 in 20 chance of failing most concentration saves in the game. This is incredibly important when you are focusing on concentration, so halfling is a great pick for sorcerer. Some other options for race here, of course, all the normally very powerful ones are still very powerful. Githyanki for the additional mobility and medium armor proficiency. Any character that gives you access to light armor and shield proficiency, like a half Wood Elf or half Drow, is especially good. Humans as well do very well. Dwergar for invisibility outside of combat is always extremely powerful. Special mention for this character, because we're focusing on fire damage, for the Asmodeus Tiefling, because while you wouldn't want normally to spend a spell slot on Hellish Rebuke, when you get it from your racial option for the Asmodeus Tiefling, it's actually a pretty nice early game usage that lets you spend a reaction to do a bunch of fire damage, which, like we said, we're focusing on fire damage with this character, and so that will enable you to have a little bit of extra damage if your character is out of position and gets hit. So any of those races can do well, but I do highly recommend Halfling because rerolling ones is so powerful for any sorcerer. For our ability scores, we're going to go with a normal split for a charisma character, but there is actually one adjustment that we're going to make, and that, of course, we're going to drop intelligence to 8, but we're going to leave charisma at 17 because this character can also be an excellent party face, and this lets us take advantage of the extremely powerful actor feat to hit 18 charisma while getting expertise in deception and performance, which is very useful to have in addition to your other dialogue skills, and this lets this character act as the party face. You can use it as a main character, of course. I think this build also does very well for Gale. If you like building him as an evocation wizard, you'll love building him as this character as well, so always great options there. We're going to take 16 Constitution and 14 Dexterity to make sure that we've got decent armor class and decent armor class and hit points, and to make sure that our concentration save is as high as possible while still hitting 17 charisma. For our skill selection, we are going to take Persuasion for the party face build and Intimidation, and then the only thing that you want to do is, unlike this hireling, you don't want to take a background that gives you performance or deception. You want to take a different background. I recommend Urchin for this character because you get Sleight of Hand or Stealth, or Guild Artisan, which gets you Insight for free, as well as giving you Persuasion, letting you put those stats elsewhere, because we're going to get Deception and Performance proficiency and expertise from taking Actor later down the line. We don't need to select those at level 1. Of course, you can select them at level 1 and then respec to get rid of them once you hit level 4 and take Actor. For our Draconic Ancestor, surprisingly, this choice doesn't matter as much as you might think. Obviously, we need to pick one of the ones that gives us fire damage, because that's very important. But of these 3, none of them give us a spell that's not normally on the Sorcerer spell list, so it's basically which of these 3 spells do we always want prepared. Disguise Self if we take Gold, Sleep if we take Fire, or Burning Hands if we take Sleep if we take Brass, or Burning Hands if we take Red Dragon. This is honestly more of a flavor choice than it looks at first. Burning Hands is, I think, slightly better than the other 2, although not a spell you're going to cast very often because it's a fairly weak spell overall. But unlike having spent a spell known slot on it, just having it access to it always being prepared means you can use its guaranteed damage to finish off low health enemies occasionally, and that is pretty useful. So I do recommend Red Dragon. Also, I think that the Red Dragon scales, the default color is the coolest. You can customize that, but you know. Like I said, this choice doesn't matter that much as long as you make sure to select one of the 3 that gives you fire damage. For our spell selection on this character, we are going to start with Chromatic Orb. It's by far the best fire damage spell at level 1, so it's thematic, but also gives you access to all of the other things it normally does. You'll usually cast this on Ice Surface, because then enemies can trip and fall, losing their entire turn, which is very powerful as well. And then we are going to take Shield, which is mandatory on basically every character that has access to it. This is what makes us so defensible as well, and it's important to note that because we're Draconic Bloodline, we get Mage Armor for free. When not wearing armor, our armor class is 13, which is very powerful because or I guess not so much powerful because you can always cast Mage Armor, but is very nice to have because combined with Shield and our high dexterity, we can hit 20 AC, meaning that it's actually very hard for this character to get hit, and combined with the additional hit points that we get every level for Draconic Resilience and our decent con score, even though sorcerers are normally squishy, this character is deceptively hard to kill thanks to Shield being so good, Counterspell that we'll get at later levels, and the additional defensive stats that we get from Draconic Bloodline. Finally, for our cantrip selection, selection, I think this is one of the characters that actually has the most constrained cantrip selection in the game, because I think there are 4 cantrips here that are actually very important for you to have. You definitely need Firebolt, because we're a fire damage focused character, so we're going to be doing extra damage with Firebolt, and that's really good, so that's our damage cantrip of choice. Friends is of course extremely useful for any party face, although be careful where you cast it, or make sure to get out of the area after casting it, so as not to turn enemies hostile or turn friendlies hostile. Minor Illusion is very important for 2 reasons. One, it's just an incredibly broken spell, and 2, we're going to get good AoE damage, so having the ability to cluster enemies for our AoE damage is really important. And Mage Hand is actually very important for this character because a potion, or more accurately a grenade, is going to be a core component of our late game setup against certain enemies, and Mage Hand lets you throw that grenade for free, which is incredibly powerful. This also lets you throw grease bottles and so on. You can set up the Mage Hand before entering combat, and then you drop the bottles at your feet. The Mage Hand can throw the grease bottles or the Arsonist's Oil, which is what we're going to be throwing later on, in order to apply those without spending a turn. Grease bottles are really good for this character because they let you create fire surfaces anywhere you want, since you're a fire damage focused character, and burning surfaces in the early levels are quite a bit of extra damage because the enemies take the damage when the surface is initially caught fire, and then also on all of their turns. So you can add basically 2d4 damage to all of your spell casts. Pretty relevant when you're doing 1d10 damage with a firebolt or whatever, not to mention that the grease bottle can actually knock enemies over as well. Alright, that's our level 1 setup. Let's go on to level 2. At level 2, we get to make our first meta magic selection, which is of course what makes this character so powerful. And so we are going to pick our 2 meta magics, and the ones that we're going to take, as with most sorcerer builds, are Distance Spell, which gives you extra range, making your positioning much easier, and Twin Spell, which is an incredibly broken mechanic. Twin Spell lets you add an additional target for the spell at the cost of the spell slot the level of the spell that you're using in sorcery points, so it's not that expensive and basically lets you take 2 turns for the price of 1. Obviously taking 2 turns is incredibly powerful. Packed into a single turn is incredibly powerful. Basically this character is worth 2 characters whenever you have sorcery points to spend on Twin Spell. You have Chromatic Orb, which is one of the best spells to twin as well, because it lets you create 2 ice surfaces. Obviously that's very powerful. Distance Spell is also just really nice because it lets you increase the range of your spells, meaning you can stay further back and play safely, or if you weren't able to get your character into position easily, then you can do that. For our spell selection at this level, we are going to take Magic Missile. Even though this is in some ways slightly redundant with Burning Hands, because both are designed for finishing off low health enemies, Magic Missile is just way, way better at that job, and so it's still the correct pick at this level. And we will want to have it for at least some encounters in the early game where being able to hit multiple spread apart enemies with guaranteed damage is really important. So it's always advisable to have Magic Missile on your sorcerers. At Sorcerer level 3, we get access to level 2 spells, and of course we get the most important meta magic selection in the game, Quicken Spell. This lets us cast a 3rd spell in a turn, because we can quicken 1 spell and then twin another spell. At this level, obviously, we can't yet, because it costs 3 sorcery points, so we won't have the sorcery points to do that. But later on, we'll be able to both quicken and twin a spell in a single round, casting 3 spells in a single round of combat, meaning that we are effectively 3 characters in one when we have access to enough sorcery points. That's resource intensive, but incredibly powerful, obviously, and burst damage is the name of the game in Baldur's Gate, and so this character's access to that is unparalleled. For our spell selection, surprisingly, even though this build is entirely built around Scorching Ray at later levels, we actually won't take it yet. We don't have the class feature that adds our charisma to fire damage yet, and so for a damage spell at this level, Cloud of Daggers is actually just better. It's the same average damage, so Cloud of Daggers, when you cast it, is 4d4 damage, but the enemies take the damage when you cast it and again at the start of their turn. So it's effectively 8d4 damage for an average damage of 20. Whereas Scorching Ray, if all 3 rays hit, is an average damage of 21, but the rays can miss. Cloud of Daggers is AoE, so it can hit more enemies at the same time, and will do more damage at this level, and we also don't have anything else we want to be concentrating on, so at this level it's better to take Cloud of Daggers. You can use this to win most fights with like goblins or gnolls or whatever very easily, because they'll stay stuck in it, and this is just an incredibly powerful spell that will see you through the game very well at this stage of the game. It's important to tailor your spell selection to what you're going to be facing, rather than following strictly the best spells to have at the end of the game. You want to make sure that you have the right spells to cast as you level up, and make extensive use of the replace spell feature when you have spells that no longer matter. That is something that I think a lot of builds neglect to do and focus only on what they want their end game setup of the character to be, but most of the game is not played at level 12, and the hardest parts of the game are at this level, so you want to make sure to tailor your spell selection for the early parts of the game when that's the level that you're at. For our cantrip selection here, it honestly doesn't really matter what we pick at this point. You could take Ray of Frost to be able to freeze puddles and have an alternate damage source. You could take Light if your character needs Light. At level 4, you're going to probably start going towards Act 2, where it's important to have some source of light within the next few levels, so you can pick that up. But honestly, at this point we have the 4 cantrips that really matter for this character, so we're just going to take True Strike, just to annoy everyone in the comments. Then, for our spell selection here, again, we're still not taking Scorching Ray yet, because we don't need it yet, but we can take Misty Step, which is very important to have access to on every character. And then for our feat, we are going to take Actor, bringing us up to 18 Charisma and getting us Expertise in Deception and Performance. We don't need to have proficiency in those to get the Expertise, so now we're very, very good at all the dialogue skills. Sorcerer level 5, we get access to level 3 spells, and we are now going to start replacing some spells. The 2 most important ones to have access to at this level are Counterspell, which is critically important and is going to be a core defensive component of your character throughout the entire game. Counterspell is one of the best possible actions in the game, and it gives this character both premium reactions, making you, like I said, surprisingly resilient for a relatively squishy character, and gives a lot of utility to your party. And then we're going to replace a spell, and the spell that we're going to replace here is Magic Missile. We've probably passed the point where we really need Magic Missile. The encounter with Ethel is the one where you most often need Magic Missile. And while it's still a very good spell, we really need to have access to higher level spells, and haste is too important to pass up on. At this point, the replace spell feature is going to become pretty in demand for this character, because it's so important that we have all of the best spell access and make sure that we are casting the right spells for the situation, so we want to make sure that we're changing out our spells for the encounters that we're going to face. At character level 6, as a Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer, we get the reason that we're here, and that is Elemental Affinity Damage. So now, whenever we cast a fire spell, we do our additional damage equal to our Charisma modifier, and that's for every instance of damage that the spell does. We also get the ability to spend a sorcery point when we cast a fire spell to gain fire resistance, which is pretty useful throughout the entire game. There's a lot of fire damage dealing enemies who having fire resistance is pretty nice against. Also, just having random resistances when you have to walk on a burning surface, or for items, there are some items that set you on fire or do fire damage to you in some other way. This is a pretty powerful ability to have access to. Resistances are always good, and remember, this character gets a few more hit points than your average sorcerer, so while we're still not going to tank by any means, this will go a little bit further than it would on a different sorcerer bloodline, because we have 6 more hit points at this point, so we're effectively doubling those hit points, doubling 6 more hit points against fire damage than we would be if we were another sorcerer type. For our spell selection here, we're going to make sure to grab Fireball as well, mostly for the theming here, but Fireball is also pretty good at this point in the game. And then we're going to replace a spell, because we just got another AoE spell. We're going to replace Cloud of Daggers with Scorching Ray, because Scorching Ray allows us to, is the core component of the spell, and now we've turned it on. At this point, we can fire either 3 rays with a level 2 spell slot or 4 rays with a level 3 spell slot with Scorching Ray, each of which is dealing 2d6 plus 4 fire damage, assuming that we have no other boosts, which we will probably have a couple other boosts at this point. And the additional damage that we get here is quite significant, meaning that our Scorching Ray is going to be capable of taking down a lot of important enemies at this level in only a single round of combat, because we can quicken it to fire 2 of them in a single round. That means that if we wanted to use our 2 level 3 spell slots on Scorching Rays, we'd be doing, what's that, 8d6 plus 8d6 plus 32 fire damage for an average damage of, have to do the math here, just about 70 fire damage in a single round of combat. At this level, that's pretty good, and that's with no items or additional buffs. Oh no, excuse me, sorry, I did that math wrong. Just about 90 fire damage, because that is 8d6 is 28 average damage times 2, which is 56, plus 32 damage from our charisma, because each of those 4 rays is adding 16 additional damage from our charisma, so 88 fire damage at this level. And of course, each of those rays has the potential to critically hit as well, so it could be considerably more than that. So we're already seeing how much damage this character can do in a single round before we've added any additional buffs or extra charisma to this character, and the amount of damage that we're doing at this point in the game is quite significant. At level 7, we get access to 4th level spells, and the one that we're going to most often use is Wall of Fire. It's on theme, and it's also just very good to have access to. We could also replace a spell. I don't know if there's anything we really want to replace at this point. We could replace Chromatic Orb, for example, because we're probably not using it as often. And one question that you have to ask yourself at this point is, do I need an AoE control spell, or do I have that from another character? Do I want to focus this character primarily on damage, or do I want to take advantage of the other powerful things that sorcerers offer? In general, I'm going to assume that you actually do want to take advantage of the other powerful things that sorcerers offer. So probably the optimal pick is to swap out Fireball, which is decent but not astonishingly powerful. For damage, we have Scorching Ray, or Chromatic Orb. And I'm just going to say we'll swap out Chromatic Orb, and we will swap it out for one of the powerful AoE control spells at this level, like Hypnotic Pattern, Sleet Storm, or Fear, all of which are very good options to have. In general, I think that for this character in particular, you're best off with Hypnotic Pattern. You can concentrate on that, and that's going to be a very good use of a spell slot. Sleet Storm, of course, the ice surface will melt when you fire your fire damage, so even though the ice surface gets reapplied every turn from Sleet Storm, this character does have some anti-synergy with Sleet Storm, so Hypnotic Pattern is probably the best of them. That said, this is only if you don't have control spells from elsewhere in your party. Still a very powerful thing for this character to do, but you can also just focus primarily on damage if you prefer that. At character level 8, we get to take a feat, and of course we're just going to increase our charisma. When we're applying our charisma to damage many times per turn, the more charisma we get, the better, and of course all of the additional availability of charisma boosts from the story events and the world, Ethel's Hair and the Mirror, will allow us to get up to 24 charisma by the end of the game, assuming that we're successful in all of those rolls, which is going to let us apply +7 to every single ray of Scorching Ray that we're firing, meaning that we're doing 49 additional damage per Scorching Ray, per cast of Scorching Ray, for a massive boost to our damage output in the end of the game. For our spell selection at this level, you're probably looking for a good utility spell at this point, because you've mostly got your combat setup completed. So I would recommend taking another AoE control spell that can give you some additional help there. Another option is to take Hold Person. Hold Person is very powerful for this build because guaranteeing critical hits is incredibly strong. You can cast Hold Person and then quicken a Scorching Ray. All of those will be guaranteed critical hits, and they will do massive damage. At this point, also, you probably have access to the Hat of Fire Acuity, which is going to let you stack Arcane Acuity so that your hold persons will be very reliable to land. Now, Arcane Acuity will stack only partially on Honor Mode because of how it interacts with Honor Mode and Scorching Rays, and honestly I don't know the exact calculation. It's not one per ray, but it's also not just one per cast, so it's probably bugged, but you seem to get one for like every second one stack of Fire Acuity for every second Scorching Ray you fire. I'm not 100% sure why that is, but even still, a small boost of, say, small boost to your DC of +4 or +6 is going to make hold person very reliable to land, and then when you land it, you can cast a guaranteed critical Scorching Ray from within 10 feet. All of the Scorching Ray hits will critical, and they'll all do massive additional damage as a result of that. At Sorcerer level 9, we continue to take Sorcerer levels. We also have an option here. You want to get the feat as soon as possible to max out your Charisma, but there is an option here of taking a level of Warlock. That gets you access to Hex, which adds an extra d6 to every single cast of Scorching Ray. The downside of Hex is that it's concentration, and it takes a bonus action, which could be used for a quickened Scorching Ray. So Hex is a great way to add some sustainability to this character and make you less rest dependent, because you're using a level 1 spell slot instead of the equivalent of a level 3 spell slot to quicken a spell, and then whatever spell you actually cast with the quicken spell. But so I think it's a great option. Personally, I like that this build can just be 12 levels of Sorcerer without even having to multiclass, but it's definitely worth mentioning Hex. And if you're taking Hex, I recommend taking it at this level after you've gotten access to your feats, to your 2 feats to max out your Charisma, because getting that as soon as possible is how you maximize your damage primarily. Here we get access to 5th level spells, and you could take Hold Monster for the same reason that we just took Hold Person. If you're doing Fire Acuity stacking, Hold Monster is great. And there's honestly not that much that we really need at this level. Obviously, any of the high tier utility spells, and you can refer to my spell tier list for more on that, is great. You will never go wrong having access to Sleet Storm or Fear. Confusion can also be powerful at this point. If you want a non-fire source of damage, you could go with Ice Storm. That doesn't take concentration. You could go with Ice Storm. You could go back for Magic Missile. But Hold Monster synergizes pretty well with this build if you're stacking Acuity, and so you can get guaranteed critical hits against anything that's not undead when you're using Hold Monster, and that's, of course, incredibly powerful. So that's what I would recommend here. At character level 10, we get an additional meta magic, and that's particularly good for this build because we are going to want to be guaranteeing our critical hits by landing Hold Person or Hold Monster. Even without Arcane Acuity stacking, heightened magic, giving the enemy disadvantage on their first saving throw against Hold Person or Hold Monster, is incredibly powerful, and combined with our very high Charisma, will effectively guarantee that we can land those spells. When we land those spells, we then have automatic critical hits when we're within 10 feet of them, which means that we can critically hit with our Scorching Rays, doubling the damage that we're doing from dice on the Scorching Rays. Obviously, that's insanely powerful, and so the ability to add Heightened Spell to our arsenal really improves this character significantly. Not to mention, of course, that just forcing enemies to have disadvantage on the saving throws against AoE control spells is nonsensically powerful as well, because this will work if you cast Heightened Spell on, say, Hypnotic Pattern. All enemies will have disadvantage on the save against the Hypnotic Pattern, no matter how many enemies you hit, meaning you can disable entire rooms full of enemies very easily. Heightened Spell is an incredibly powerful and I would say, on the edge of broken ability that doesn't get talked about that often, but because people are used to stacking their DCs to massive levels with Arcane Acuity so that it doesn't matter that much. But if you don't want to use Arcane Acuity, or which I don't blame you for because it's a little broken. But also, even if you are using Arcane Acuity, Heightened Spell can make it absolutely certain that you will land your control spells, which of course is incredibly strong. For our spell selection at this level, we pretty much have everything that we want. We're going to pick some kind of utility spell, probably, something that makes us a little more survivable or a little easier to engage in or it gives us a little more control, I will probably say that you should pick something with a relatively wide array of applications. So I'm going to go with something like Slow that you can just throw into any fight, or Sleet Storm. Probably Sleet Storm is the best here because it's just a very powerful spell that you will be happy to have at any given time. Cantrip selection at this point really doesn't matter. We now have everything that we want. We could pick up Blade Ward to possibly keep us alive in a really bad circumstance. You wouldn't use this regularly on this character because you're not a tanking character, but Blade Ward can be helpful in an extreme emergency where you're like out of Misty Steps or whatever. Not something that you will use often or that will give you a lot of utility, but none of these spells at this point have a ton of utility. You can also just take Ray of Frost to freeze puddles. Either of those things are really good, so or are marginally useful, and marginally useful is the best you're getting out of this cantrip selection. I'll probably go with Ray of Frost here. At character level 11, you gain the ability to fly at will all the time. Just your normal movement speed you can replace with a flight action. That's incredibly powerful, of course, although quite late in the game, so it's not a huge component of this character's overall power, but when you get it, it's really strong. It doesn't totally replace Misty Step, because this uses your movement speed rather than your bonus action, so it's not exactly the same as just having Misty Step all the time, and you won't get quite as much distance with it as you will by Misty Stepping, but you can use Dash to double fly if you need to, because Dash just gives you gives you additional movement speed, so you can use your action to dash and double fly. This makes your positioning in combat basically free, combined with your incredibly solid defensive actions and relative tankiness, good AC for this type of character. Of course, you are going to be very, very difficult to catch and kill because you have all the great defensive reactions, and your positioning is going to always be perfect because you can always get up onto high ground where enemies can't reach you. You can always make your way to different parts of the map. Less important at this stage in the game because the arenas at this stage are often just big empty boxes, so the ability to position on high ground, and enemies of course have lots of mobility skills by the time you reach level 11, but it's still an extremely useful and powerful ability, and you will find lots of different opportunities to use it as you adventure. Get used to playing around this flight ability because it's going to give you a lot of options that you aren't used to looking at this point, because you probably have, by the time you reach level 11, you have your plan for how you're going to set up fights pretty set. You've been doing things the same way for 10 levels. This ability changes how you're going to start most fights, and so makes you have to think about fights in a new way. So just really important to experiment with this ability, find out the powerful things you can do with it. For our spell selection here, because this is maximum level and we get our 6th level spell, we're going to take Globe of Invulnerability. Not only is this a busted spell that just completely wins some of the hardest encounters in the game entirely on its own, it's also very good for this character because you just want to sit and fire off Scorching Rays all the time. Globe of Invulnerability means you get 3 turns of just being able to fire off Scorching Rays. Most combats you probably want to focus on haste, and you don't want to spend use your 6th level spell slot to cast Scorching Ray rather than cast Globe, but this is still just a very powerful spell that it's great to have access to, and I highly recommend picking it up because it's going to be a core component of many of your fights. This spell is just so powerful, it completely wins fights on its own, and you shouldn't leave home without it. Finally, at Sorcerer level 12, we get access to another 6th level spell if we want it, although once we have Globe of Invulnerability, this character doesn't really need that much in terms of 6th level spells. So at this point, the pick is mostly for flavor, although the most powerful pick is probably just yet another AoE control spell that gives you more options. Fear, Confusion, or Slow are all good picks at this point. Greater Invisibility can add another layer of combat, not for this character because you won't have great stealth checks, but to another character you can use Greater Invisibility, or any of the utility spells at lower levels that you think you might need and feel like you have wanted throughout the game. You can go back and pick them up at this level. The real thing that we're here for is just the feat, which is of course very good, although if you have taken an extra Warlock level, then you'll just get Hex. from the Warlock level instead. Hex and Command from a level of Fiend Warlock is still just insanely good for this character, so that's always an option to do as well. I kind of like that we get a feat here, and there's several options for feats as well. So we're going to take just a utility spell, whatever we kind of want at this point, and then there's several options for feats, all of which are quite good. We could take Alert, because Alert is really powerful on every character, almost certainly the default best pick. Another great option is Spell Sniper, which reduces the number we need to roll a crit with spells by 1, and that's all spells, so even though it gives you an extra cantrip, the effect works on all spells, so it basically increases by 5% your chance of critically hitting with a Scorching Ray, which is incredibly powerful, of course. Warcaster to help us maintain concentration is obviously good. Is good for obvious reasons as well. Magic Initiate is not as good as just taking for Warlock, for Hex and Eldritch Blast or whatever, is not as good as just taking the Warlock level, because you can only use Hex once per day if you take Magic Initiate, but if you just take the Warlock level, you get Hex multiple times per day. A feat that you might be wondering why I haven't mentioned it also is Elemental Adept. You could gain the ability to ignore fire resistance, and you can't roll a 1 when casting spells of this type. Obviously, that's very powerful, but that's one reason that we're a halfling. And because we are fire damage, we have a better option for overcoming resistance. We don't need Elemental Adept to benefit from this. This isn't a bad pick, but and certainly won't be a problem for if you take this and just select Elemental Adept for fire, but I think we can get more value out of Spell Sniper or Alert when combined with an item that allows us to actually gain an advantage from enemies having fire resistance rather than a disadvantage. This is one of the unique advantages that this character gets as a pyromancer, and it would be a shame not to make use of it. So for this character, I'm just going to take Alert because it's just so good to have on every character. Makes winning initiative good, and when you win initiative with this character, you instantly kill the most important enemy on the field, making your combats very difficult to lose. So, when you put it all together, you get what I believe is the highest damage legitimate character in the game, not abusing bugs or glitches or anything, doing massive burst damage once per day, and consistently very, very strong damage with every spell slot that you use, as well as giving you access to some of the best utility in the game, extremely high DC control spells if you want those, just an overall extraordinarily powerful addition to your party that will one-shot basically every boss in the entire game. Will have options to ignore resistances and stuff as well, so you don't have to worry about enemies having resistances to your element, and you are just going to be doing so much damage that nothing can stand in the way. Of course, we can make this character even stronger with itemization, so let's take a look at that. We are going to in the early game, an item that I like quite a bit is Nature's Snare, because each instance of your Scorching Ray is going to have the save against the ensnare, and ensnared enemies, of course, can't move, which makes them helpless for melee enemies, and you'll have advantage on your attacks against them, which is very powerful. So that's a really nice early game staff. In the late game, of course, the best staff, and this character is the best character at using this weapon, which is one of the best possible weapons in the game. So not only is this just a top-tier item, you are one of the best characters at using it, and that is Marka Heshkir. This allows you to add your proficiency to damage when using the attuned element, and your proficiency is +4, so you're adding 4 more damage to every single ray shot that you're making when you have Marka Heshkir equipped and attuned. It also lets you cast one of the 6-level Scorching Rays for free once per day, which is of course incredibly powerful as well. So Marka Heshkir definitely best in slot for this character. Another really important item for this character is Arsonist's Oil. Arsonist's Oil is a weapon coating that an ally of yours can use to turn damage resistance into damage vulnerability. This is obviously insanely powerful against enemies who are fire resistant naturally, but also you can throw water at an enemy, wet enemies have fire resistance, and Arsonist's Oil turns that into fire vulnerability. That is means that you can give vulnerability to any enemy with that combination, and that is incredibly strong as well, provided that you can land an attack with an ally who has Arsonist Soil on it. You can, I believe, also throw the Arsonist Soil at the enemy, but you have to actually hit them with the bottle in order to have this work. And I've had some inconsistent results with that, so better to put it on an ally's weapon before and hit them with one weapon attack before you go off with your Fire Sorcerer. Another item, of course, that's very useful is the Hat of Fire Acuity. Whenever you deal fire damage, which you're doing many, many times per turn, you gain Arcane Acuity for 2 turns. That makes your save DCs higher and makes your chances to hit higher, so your rays will basically stop missing as soon as you hit with a couple of them. Another option here, although this one is quite dangerous, so you have to be a little careful with it, is the Pyro Quickness Hat, where whenever you deal fire damage, you set yourself on fire and gain an additional bonus action. This can let you cast another quickened spell, so for a third or fourth Scorching Ray in a round, depending on whether you're hasted or not. But each time your Scorching Ray lands, the burn gets reapplied and you take a d4 of fire damage for every single Scorching Ray shot. So this is very dangerous. It will do a lot of damage to you if you use this. Very powerful, but you have to be ready to take 70, 80 damage in a round when you fire this off. So only for use if you really need to burst down a specific enemy. Another option is anything that adds to damage, but a particularly powerful one for this build is the Callous Glow Ring. You do an extra 2 points of damage against anything that's in bright light, so that's most things as long as you have a light source. And that damage is radiant damage, so it will work with any source of damage that you're doing, but more importantly, it means that every Scorching Ray is now doing a tick of radiant damage, which lets you also use anything that applies Radiating Orb, like the Luminous Gloves. That means that any enemy that survives your barrage will be making its attacks, because of Radiating Orb, at a tremendous penalty to all of its attack rolls, and so that even if a boss happens to survive your barrage, you'll stack 10, 15 Radiating Orb stacks on them, which is going to stop them from doing any damage to you in return. So that's yet another broken mechanic that this character has access to. You'll also, of course, want a good robe and good other items, but these are the most important key ones. One thing that's nice about this character is, other than Markahesh gear, there's no specific items that are really key for it, but you can power it up with anything that adds save DC, anything that adds to hit rolls, and anything that adds damage per spell cast. Lightning charges are also very powerful with the Spell Sparkler or whatever. The Gloves of Dexterity, very good for this character as well, of course, like they are for all characters, but you'll probably have another character who wants those more. So overall, one thing that I really like about this character is, other than Markahesh gear, it's pretty item independent as well, while still giving you tons and tons of power. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and of course, as always, if you have, feel free to leave a comment, like the video. Both of those things help me out a ton with the algorithm, and you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides, Baldur's Gate 3 character building tips, tricks, and tier lists, and other strategy game content. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.